How many people here live in, personally live in mixed population housing? No? Okay. And actually, we all do, whether we know it or not. We're all living in an integrated community that's diverse with different cultural backgrounds, different histories, different lives, and different challenges and disabilities. The Mixed Income Initiative and Mixed Population Initiative is something that HUD has been looking at for at least over the last 10 years, initially looking at what's been framed as the de-warehousing of the poor, and also looking at the disabled and vulnerable people in our country, and that initiative has not felt stronger anywhere else but in New York. Looking at outcomes, such as housing and the relationship that plays with health, such as shelter from the elements outside, housing as a source of attachment and identity where we live really plays a lot with who we are as people. Affordable housing has been linked to health and well-being of individuals. When the supply is insufficient, low-income families and individuals are often forced to limit expenditures such as healthy food, limits on medical care and health care. Metropolitan areas, there's an increased spatial segregation of our poor households. So this idea of integrating housing and integrating different incomes and different populations of people is something that's not new, and it's something that really we've been looking at having specific positive behavioral outcomes, whether they be income outcomes, whether they become behavioral outcomes or life course outcomes. When someone looks at a large organization such as NYCHA, that is probably one of the largest mixed population housing developments in the country that has embraced this model for years, you have seen 50% of their populations are low-income families that are above the income brackets but have chosen to stay because of the sense of community that it's fostered. One of the theories that HUD has approached and people have approached in this area has been the role model theory, which is, mixed income initiatives increase social interaction amongst different groups, different people of levels of functioning and different levels of income, and security and well-being and community has a positive impact on the rates of employment, and fosters personal responsibility of upkeep. So when we're looking at integrated supportive housing as a model, I'll give you a little idea of what Lantern's background is. Our first program opened in 1996. We presently have 15 programs as of 2013. And we have over 1,200 units in 2013. With regards to our building sites as opposed to scattered site, more than half of those are mixed population initiatives, and even the new developments we have in the pipeline are mixed housing initiatives. So we talked about role model theory, increased social interaction, fosters upkeep, security, and well-being due to a sense of community, de-warehousing of the poor. So this is a model that clearly makes a lot of sense when we're looking at housing people with specific psychosocial as well as disability challenges, because we're putting them in an integrated community in a housing development that's somewhere where any one of us would live. So we're moving away from adult homes. So you hear terms like de-warehousing, deinstitutionalization of the mentally ill, and those with disabilities. So when we pair people up in buildings that are such as the ones that we all live in every day, we see that the bar is raised and people are looking to other tenants as examples of how to live their life. At Lantern, we embrace quality housing for all. We talked about NYCHA's tradition of mixed use and mixed income housing, and families are connected to the community and remain even when incomes rise. The use of integrated housing with different populations develops naturally and mutually supportive community. So what we've been seeing on the ground is that once the building comes together, it develops its own homogeneous community of its own, for lack of a better term, that isn't really based on population designation, isn't really based on disability. So we tend to see the younger tenants looking after their elder tenants. We tend to see the higher functioning, maybe low-income community tenants looking after our disabled tenants and taking care of each other that way. And there's a term that I use when I supervise my program directors called being clinically not clinical, which is the idea of embracing the community as a whole from a social work perspective in terms of service provision in a way that doesn't feel like you're coming to a clinic or you're coming to an outpatient setting. So we're really opening up services to the entire community as opposed to those designated by contract, in a way that's acceptable to everyone. I think one of the challenges when you're looking at mixed income and integrating formerly homeless and disabled tenants with those challenges and community tenants that are coming in looking for just a low-income housing opportunity is the community tenants not really having a connection to the services that are going on. So we tend to make the services open and accessible to the whole building and translatable to the whole building and relevant to the whole building, as opposed to the specific populations that are coming in based on those special needs, if that makes any sense. When you look at studies in this, and what we've seen on the field and on the floor is, the typical types of challenges that come with mixed population housing, or the typical things that a lot of you probably see every day if you're in these types of developments. We see a lot of noise complaints, a lot of issues with unauthorized visitors, maybe some substance abuse issues, drug trafficking in and out. But when you survey tenants, and studies looked at surveying tenants in these types of buildings, the community tenants don't really attribute that to the special need populations per se. They just kind of see that as a challenge tenant, and as long as the partnership between property management and social services is working well, the community tenants really just see this as part of another building in New York that they're living in with the same kinds of challenges and diversity that all of us are living in every day in New York. So it isn't that different. It's actually very replicative of what housing is for all of us, and I think that's what we want to see for our homeless population, or special needs population in addition, is that they could access the same kinds of housing that you and I could access. It's quality housing, it's aesthetically pleasing, a lot of the properties are new development and they're beautiful. A large number of our properties are new development. Each site strives to achieve the same goals, which is to provide safe and affordable and aesthetically desirable housing to everyone, and that's including community tenants and special needs tenants in the same sites and across sites. We establish a unique building culture that fosters opportunities for personal growth, development, and accountability. So for instance, we've had interesting mixes of buildings with different types of populations. I don't know that there's necessarily a science to this at this point, but at Lantern, we've tended to house, for instance, youth aging out of foster care with low-income adults within a certain age range, and that's in one of our buildings called Vicinitas Hall in the Bronx. And what we see happening are the aging out of foster care youths are seeing low-income youths right around the same age as them, paying their own rent, going out to work. So there's this role modeling that's happening. I had interesting meetings with a bunch of the tenants there in preparation for this presentation. I met with two individuals, interestingly, and both of them actually coincidentally had histories of coming out of foster care, but the low-income community tenant saw himself as a mentor to the other tenants, saw himself as being able to set an example, and the tenant aging out of foster care, interestingly enough, felt that in the community. And the most succinct thing he said, and kind of encapsulates what we're trying to establish in this type of model, is, if it wasn't, and this is a direct quote, if it wasn't for not having a key to the lobby, because most supportive housing buildings you have to buzz into, if it wasn't for not having a key to the lobby and having to be buzzed in, you wouldn't know that this is supportive housing, which was very kind of telling. And that's what we're trying to embrace. And both of these gentlemen were identical in their interests and their future goals and have connected around those issues together. So we see a lot of rehabilitation happening. We've also had a tenant with Asperger's disorder who, I don't know if you're aware with the aging out of foster care contract, but usually you have to move out when you're 26. That's kind of the benchmark that's set through the contracts. And we were able to allow him to get a job. He's finally working, and through role modeling, he was able to work out the social issues that are associated with autistic spectrum disorders. And we're looking at getting him back into Vicinitas Hall after the contract ends for him as a low-income tenant, where he can continue his life, continue to obtain and maintain affordable, safe, quality housing, and move on with his life, which is a great example. Some of the key concepts that we use in mixed population housing are mirroring a real life where diversity and interpersonal challenges are commonplace. So once again, like the buildings that all of us live in, there's a human tendency for individuals to aspire to the level of behavior around them. So modeling and motivation for change. I live in like an 80-20 development down in Lower Manhattan. Most of the people where I live work on Wall Street. And I could tell you, I iron my shirts a lot more than I used to. I wear nicer shoes, and the bar is set higher for me because I'm living around people that are doing better than me. There is an expectation that I'm going to do better too, and that's how. And I had to look back at myself since I moved into this development and look at my wardrobe. The experience for the community tenants, studies and surveys have demonstrated that the length of occupancy, the rent outcomes, tenant satisfaction, and management issues show little variability in populations after the initial adjustment periods. So average occupancy rates really look identical to our community tenants and our special needs tenants. Rent arrear issues basically kind of look the same. And when problematic issues come up, the community tenants don't necessarily attribute those issues to special needs population or formerly homeless people. I think, we have a perspective of, we know who's going into our buildings. We know here are the formerly homeless guys. We know they come with a host of challenges because we get dossiers on them this big from DHS, and we're housing community tenants. But I think from the community tenant perspective, they don't really know everyone's histories. They are really interested in their apartment and in their lives, and it's not as dichotomous for them as it might be for us in terms of how we're seeing it. So again, for Lantern, our goals for integrated population properties are to provide safe, affordable, aesthetically desirable housing stability, decrease stigma, and promote normalization, and providing services to the community as a whole. Our base mixed population properties that have been most interesting are Hunter's Moon Hall up on Broadway, which was an old SRO from way back, a place that was probably not too safe to be in not too long ago, that we took over and rehabbed in 2008. I had the opportunity to meet with a gentleman who has lived there since he's 28 years old, and that was in 1974 when he moved in. And he basically described the building as like the OK Corral. There were knifings and gun shootings and deaths and squatters and drugs. And since Lantern has come in and taken over the property and put structure around the property and started housing in DHS formerly homeless tenants, HASA New York 3 tenants, and a lot of community tenants that lived in the building even before I was born, they find that the building is a lot safer now. It's a lot more well integrated. Their satisfaction of life in the building is a lot greater. We have a tenant at Hunter's Moon Hall who just turned 103 years old and has been living there since the 1920s. And her primary caretaker is the wife of the original super of the building before Lantern took over, which is just a wonderful story of how a community in a building and a community on the outside could kind of take care of itself, and we look to embrace those kinds of models. At Hunter's Moon, some of the great stuff we've done is we've integrated the community tenants with formerly homeless tenants with varying degrees of disability. We do not, by design, utilize representative payee interventions with our special needs tenants because we're setting the bar equally for everyone, and we want people to succeed, so we don't want to develop a dependency relationship where people are only maintaining themselves because we're helping them. We have Schaefer Hall, we have Cedars Fox Hall, we have Jasper Hall, a lot of aging out of foster care, living with families with the single head of household with a disability, and that integration and working with the community and seeing a family and someone who came out of a displaced family coming together as a community around activities, around the newsletter, around the tenant council, has really helped this kind of model really play out nicely for us.